Pessoal, bom dia. Hoje aqui nós estamos com um convidado bastante interessante. Eu acredito que muita gente, acho que já até conheça as obras desse autor e desse ilustrador, que atualmente tem sido inspiração para muitos artistas também, sejam tatuadores ou sejam da área também de ilustração ou de pesquisas de estudo da arte nórdica da era Viking. Estou aqui com o Jonas Markussen, que é uma entrevista que eu aguardei bastante, né, para fazer. Inclusive, ele foi uma grande inspiração também para que eu fizesse, no caso, a minha dissertação de mestrado nessa parte de arte da era Viking. Então, eu vou iniciar aqui a entrevista com ele e a gente vai saber um pouco mais sobre o trabalho dele e sobre um pouco desses estilos artísticos da era Viking. Jonas, thank you so much for your presence here in the channel. It's a big honor receiving you here. You are a very biggest inspiration for me study more about the Viking Age art. Your work is brilliant. Your books are very, very nice to study about this. And for starting the interview, I would like to know, how do you start your interest for this area of the Viking Age, the art of this time, and how this is your biggest inspiration for doing this work?
I think it's always been with me. Like I've grown up in Denmark, and you get presented with the history, and I've always been a creative and very visual person. So that's like the ornamentation of the Viking Age have always like intrigued me in some way, like without being sort of a specific like hobby or something, but it's always been there. And I remember like sometimes during my childhood, I've tried to recreate these things, like some of the artworks, like art styles, and tried to make it my own. I remember like a school project at some point, and sort of like really battling with these ornament like knotwork designs and stuff, and having a hard time like wrapping my mind around how to actually do them. So it's something that's always been with me, and also like this sort of enigma of how to actually recreate it. So, and then a few years ago, I've had some creative works and like freelance stuff, and I wanted to do my own thing. And I tried. I've never been sure about like what to actually pursue. But then I tried a few things out, and like I think I did some bird drawings actually. That was one avenue I could have gone down, and then I did some like very initial like Viking Age inspired stuff, and I definitely like it just felt right. Like there was so much to just dive into and like investigate and experiment with, like cover, and also like communicate out to other people like me who I mean were like me when I was growing up and didn't know how to go about this. So that's how I came about it, and then I just took it from there and ran with it. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. It's we saw that you are very we have a very lot of study for doing your job, because you analyze with very, very details about this art, and it is incredible because you have a story so deep in that, and this is very amazing to saw your work. It's how can I say, this is a biggest find for many artists have your work, because we saw that you have are very careful with the details, with the history about every piece that you analyze, and this is very nice that for the studies of these parts of the history of Viking Age. And how you can define exactly is the most important that you consider about the Viking Age art? How we can define this type of art? Do you consider how you can explain how this works, this type of art, the styles, It will be very interesting to know that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that's also a question I'm still trying to look for the answer for. Because I mean, how do you define this? I think a lot of historians and like art historians still struggle with how to actually like grapple with this. How does it fit in? How do we even understand it today? Like how does it fit into art history even? Like it's not that it's not unknown, but how do you analyze it? Uh, how do you understand what the message is behind it? What is it trying to convey, right? And I think we haven't really gotten that far, really understanding it. Like in academic circles, we're good at like analyzing the details of it, and like I do reconstructing it, for example, or like categorizing the different objects and stuff like that. But actually understanding like what is it and how do we describe it? What is it? What is it? That's a really good question, actually. uh, I mean, for me and what I'm learning from my studies the past few years is I see this really clear through line of yeah. And again, there's a question of who's making the art, right? Wasn't it? Can we call it an artist? I'm not sure. Is it like a craftsman? Probably. I mean, it's yeah. It was probably more like a, I don't know, like maybe even someone you could consider a magician or someone who had some kind of magical capacity, like just in their capacity to create the artworks. Because what I was trying to say before is I very much understand like the purpose of the artworks to imbue any object with some kind of magic. Usually there's always some kind of shape-shifting essence to the artwork. You often don't really know at first glance what you're actually looking at, and maybe not even at second or third glance. It's kind of, or it's not even kind of, it is made to deceive your eyes. It's not like in modern times where we're so used to communicating in like very directly to the perceiver, or to the one who's perceiving the art, or like pop art is very like, this is the message, right? In Viking Age art, it's the complete opposite. It's about concealment. It's about shape-shiftiness. It's about not being able to grasp what this is. And in that shape-shiftiness, in that undefined space, it kind of creates an image that is magical. Because in that, because you can't grasp it, it creates the space of undefinedness, this in-between space, right? I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense in my head, but it is very hard to like define and like put into good words what that space and what that message is, how it performs the art, right? Yeah.
That's very interesting. And for the next question, it's a little bit just how can I say, sometimes some researchers have a little bit of doubt about how many styles have the Viking Age art. One says, "Oh, have six," or sometimes seven, because have styles that are very close, like the bow and bow, and they don't know how to define exactly how many styles are most popular. So many more says there are six in the number. But How we can, in your conception, how many styles do you think that have in your for your researchers, and how we can describe these styles, the different principal difference from these styles for the researchers know how I need to solve that categories that are more important for analyze that piece, analyze that, and how do you in your research do you have this perception?
Yeah, let me start off by saying, like, I'm not an academic. I'm not a historian. This is my conception, or like my concept of what I'm looking at, what I've studied in my own work, and what makes sense to me. Like, of course, based on academic works. So it's not like just grabbed out of the blue. But I might be a little more like easygoing around academic terms than an actual academic. I appreciate the work, and my work is built on top of that, and I'm trying to convey the content of that work to the general public. But just as that is out of the way, like my how I understand the development of Viking Age art in particular is, and you can call it whatever you want. Like there might be some discussion about how to actually categorize the different periods and what like concerns to what period and stuff like that. But for me, let me just say, like, in my head there's seven periods. Like there's Boer style and what I call Oseberg style, and then there's Boer style, Jelling style, Mamme style, Ringerike style, and Urne style. And I think what you're talking about and what you're asking about specifically maybe is like the first part of that, like from Boer style to Boer style, like what's going on here. And for my own ease of use and for ease of use of communicating these periods, I've sorted to name it like Boer style, and then Oseberg style, and then Boer style, because we're pretty sure about the Boer style and Boer style, but what comes in between there, I've heard. I mean, it is like a term like Berdal style, but I haven't, and maybe it's just me, but I haven't seen it like very a fulfilling description of what Berdal style might entail and how it connects to the other style. I mean, it might be in the works. I don't know. Maybe I haven't seen it, but for me, in my work and my understanding of the styles, I haven't met like a good description of, or a concept of how to integrate it into like this evolution of styles, which is for me very clear when you watch the objects, the artworks. There's a very, very clear development in the art style, like throughout the Viking Age. And of course, you can talk about different power centers having influence in different times and stuff like that. And like Boer style maybe being more of a more Gotlandic style than, and maybe not so. Maybe a style that didn't influence the rest of Scandinavia quite as much as some of the other styles, but you can't really argue that it's not a very common style in Scandinavia after all. But it's definitely like anchored in Gotland. And again, when we go from Boer style, which is fairly easy to discern and decipher and like categorize, you have this space in between that's not very well academically described, from Boer style and then to Boer style. Boer style, we have these horse harness tag from Boer that are very like clear Boer style examples, and we know the style from throughout Scandinavia, it's very recognizable with these like bear-like gripping beast faces that are seen in front with a pretzel nut body and signifiers like that, like characteristics like that. But in between that, boar style and boar style, for me to see, it's we have this find from Oseberg, which encapsulates like style characteristics from in between. Like some of it is boar style, and some of it is obviously absolutely not, and something is in between there. So for me, like analyzing the like just that specific find, and it is a bit atypical because it's mainly wooden objects, which is completely atypical for what we see in almost in the entire rest of the Viking Age. So it's in that manner, it's also very difficult to compare like wooden artworks to metal artworks like jewelry and swords and what have you. But there are like very clear boar style examples in the Oseberg find. And there's, as I said, also very not boar style examples in that group. And for me, I see some yeah, and it's in process. I'm also like trying to figure out myself like what part of this, because some of the what I call Oseberg art is very similar to boar style with the bear like gripping beast, which originates like they appear in boar style. So you have these, one of the main typical visual signifiers starts in boar style, goes through Oseberg style, and then into boar style. So it's, you have to look at other signifiers, like other, like what kind of knotwork styles are, what kind of other ornamentation is part of these artworks to kind of figure out what is of what period, right? But I mean, at least for me, I've seen and seen the specifically Oseberg find a lot of gripping beast-like beings that are not developed into this very succinct gripping beast motif in the boar style. They're more cat-like. They sometimes have pointy ears in the Oseberg find. They're much more lively. They have, you might know one of the animal heads that have like gripping beast all over the neck. And that's kind of an example of what I mean by Oseberg style, because you could say that the gripping beast itself, you could find that in the previous boar style. But in this particular art piece, it's much more lively. They cover the full object. They're not just as they are in boar style, as one gripping beast in the middle of another composition of other animals. They take over the stage, so to speak, and they're much more lively. They weave in and out of each other. And they have these kind of boar style gripping beast like classical heads with the ears and the round eyes and stuff like that, but not quite. Like it's, their bodies are different. They move in a different way, and you find that too in similar animal types in the jewelry too, where they kind of a typical Oseberg thing is, or characteristic is, like the bodies of the animals are like twisted, and you see that in jewelry too, and you don't see that in boar style examples, like classic boar style examples. And these twisted bodies are sometimes paired with pointed ears, for example. There's some small signifiers that all come together in some conglomerate of like what I would call Oseberg characteristics, and what others might call Berdale style characteristics. But I'm just not sure about like that word in connection to what I described. So I choose to call it Oseberg style. So yeah, so that's the early style, and that's kind of how I perceive the three early styles, and their how to, yeah, I don't know how to go about it when the academic presentation of it is not quite adequate, because academia has a certain method which is important, and sometimes there are like, I don't know how to call it, like academic holes, because there's just not been enough research in that particular area. So so when you want to like make a coherent picture, like, and present it to the general public, as I do, it's and you probably do too, like you want to understand how Viking art works and what it is, and like how it develops, like what do you do with that? And that can be hard sometimes, right? So yeah, I mean, and I can go on about the other styles, but I will, yeah, you take the word.
Yeah, it's a very mysterious about the Viking Age is the artist styles, because when we saw that is possible. I think in the future, if they find something, they will create and say, "Oh, we have a new style," and they will put in a for categorize all the styles, because some researchers have, when I start my research for my master degree, I saw that some researchers using 80 styles because of the Berdal find in the some brushes, turtle brushes. And I was thinking, oh my god, I have to use 8, 7, or 6. I was completely
So
um,
how does that
uh,
go? So you have both Boer, Oseberg, Berdale, Boer. Is that how it goes, or how do you understand that?
yeah,
Uh,
I was using these how can I say, this timing line example for Osberg, Bro, Berdal, Borri, Yelling, Mamin, Hindrich, Yunis.
yeah.
Some 8. But I was analyzing for this, but sometimes I was thinking, and how many styles can this find sometime in the future, because you have many possibilities in the future that uh, a new style can be searched in some point, because
Yeah,
they more and more styles
and I
are
mean that
searched.
kind of goes at the question of like what is style? Like, because it might differ like from which angle you go at it. Like if there's like my perception is like in academia, you can very quickly like go into, and that's, I mean, it's a really good thing that we have this very good analysis, a very particular, meticulous analysis of the objects. But sometimes it can get in the way of like a more art historical perception or analysis of a style. And then you sometimes, it seems, end up with a lot of different styles, because you have, oh, this workshop did it in a different way. There's this specific detail in this brooch we see in a few areas over here. And it, like, in the material, it looks very different to an maybe untrained, like a non-art trained eye, for example. If you only look at like manufactural differences, you can sometimes, and this is broad strokes, of course, but you can get down into a rabbit hole of like inventing a new style when it's in my eyes, might not be a style. It might be a different signifier for the same style. So there's definitely like the question of how do we even talk about styles? How do we even categorize? Like it matters, right? Because like even today, like how would you describe like 80s style? Like how do you describe 90s style? Like do you need to differentiate, or is there a beginning to the 90s? Is that like when, and like then there's where, and in what part of society, because there's different styles there too, right? So how do you even talk about styles, right? Yeah, but I mean, and to me, it's the talking about and the description, like the language around it and the categorization, in my eyes, should always only serve the perception of like the understanding of the art. That's the most important thing. So if it doesn't work, why are we doing it this way, right? So for me, it's like we can change things around if we need to. We can invent or like describe new styles if need be. If we discover new things, and I think there should be some elasticity to the academia of it all in that way. And I know it can be a bit iffy because there's egos involved and there's like very different perception, and sometimes it's not easy to like meet because you have your own perception and you might have invested your whole life in this theory or something like that. So there's a lot of factors going into this in my perception and in my understanding of it. But for me at least, it's a very how to say. I mean, I come from an architectural background. I'm trained in structural thinking and like how systems come together and integrating various crafts and ways of thinking into one project, right? So already there, I am almost. I mean, I am an academic, but my mind works in a different way than to the actual like specific research into this specific style, right? This very analytical method of like analyzing a specific object, right? A type of object. So I think I have a little bit more a different way of perceiving things and thinking through things and connecting things in a different way that I feel like. And I mean, again, I don't have any academic investments either, so it's easier for me to just say, this is how I see it. Take it or leave it, right? I mean, I love to be, how do you say, like, if you have another opinion, I love to hear it, because, like, then it, I lost the word for it, but then, I mean, it makes me think about things again and like double check my own thoughts and like, oh, where does this fit in? Because there's a lot of like mysteries about the Viking Age that we don't know about, like you said. So yeah, and I mean that's kind of the fun thing about it, right? I mean, you probably know that from your own work, like it gets your mind thinking of all the possibilities, and like you become sort of Sherlock Holmes, like you need to like look into this, or what about this over here, like how did that work, like what's the possibilities, how can we think about what was possible, like how can we get to some kind of answer, right? And that's what makes it fun, I think. Yeah.
For me, that you say that you are not academic, but you are, I think you are biggest proof that we don't need to do properly University of Archaeology or something to do that we love. You do things that are very close that many archaeologists that drawing do, and you do with very perfection. That's for me is a very very interesting know about your work, because you are not formally in history or in archaeology or something, or doing some post graduating or something, but you have some careful with doing your job that you are very close to the academic person, and that's very we can say that is a very very um, biggest thing, and a very, how can I say, you have you put your heart in this
Mm.
work. This is fantastic, because we don't need to do some how can I say, studies of doing some master or doctorate degree. You do this because you love, and your work are very appreciated for many academics and for many artists nowadays, and that's very nice. So
Yeah.
that, and for my next question, we saw that some things that are closely in the styles of the Viking Age art, that this art have some inspirations from a past for the Germanic art and the Vandal art to the Viking Age art.
Mm.
And we saw that we have many creatures that sometimes is a big challenge to know how these creatures are and how they work, because sometimes, oh, I see a wolf here, no, it's not a wolf, oh, it's a bear. And sometimes I think, oh my god, this is so crazy, how understand this art. But it's a beautiful art style, the Viking Age and the Germanic art, because they are have many things that are close and some things that are different. And for you, how we can sometimes solve the images and analyze, for example, how can I solve that this is a bear, or this is a wolf, this is a serpent, or a dragon? How the describes we can solve, and how the Germanic art and the Vandal art are very being part of the influences for the Viking Age art. How do you work with that when you do your work with these creatures in
Yeah.
your work?
Yeah, that's a good question, and kind of it gets to one of my pet peeves, because and it's something I'm trying to work on, because I always like, and you must get that too, and I have that like, what is this, like, how do you draw a bear, how do you draw a deer, how do you draw a wolf, like and people want to know that, people want to like like add the, if you get to a picture of something like an artwork of something that's some kind of animal, people want to know, like, is it a wolf, is it a lion, like. But my pet peeve is like, kind of, it doesn't matter, because I don't think it did. Like, it was a beast first and foremost, like, and it, like, the artworks are always about like shape shifting. So the one that makes, oftentimes, like, sometimes it depicts a particular animal. I mean, I'm not disregarding that, but I mean, in general, like, the ornamentation of it all is about shape shiftiness. So the goal of the art itself is to not be determined, like it to not be grasped, to not be perceived as this or the other. Like, it's all of the things at the same time. So just to say, that's like, it's such a pet peeve of mine to just get that out of the way, and then we can get to, like, yes, of course there are some signifiers, and there's some through lines of animal types that were definitely popular throughout, like even from the Germanic Iron Age and into the Viking Age, from the migration period and the fall of the Roman Empire, and however we want to define that, and like 400s and into like 1100s. And of course, we have like some kind of bird of prey. In the early depiction, it's with like a spiral beak, which is very characteristical for when you're dealing with a bird. It's always the spiral beak. Whereas if it's some kind of mammal, like a predatory mammal or something like that, they would look like they have a beak because it's like these very elongated jaws. But in reality, they have teeth, and they have 4 legs. And when you look at very clear examples of it, but you wouldn't know if you just saw like the head without teeth. If you found an example, like a very simplistic presentation of that type of beast, you wouldn't know that it was a predatory mammal if it doesn't have teeth or legs or something like that. And you would probably misjudge it for a bird if you didn't know better. Like people, like we all do. I've been there. So it's typically like we have in the early Germanic Age, Iron Age, we have these somewhat clear depictions of either some kind of eagle, raven, bird. We have some kind of beast, not quite clear what it is. If it's a wolf, if it's just a beast, it's very hard to say. But we do also have some very clear wolf variations of it, and we have also some very clear boar style depictions, like with tusks and like much more pig-like profiles of the head, in contrast to the very stylized versions of the animals. And that kind of like these types of animals kind of more or less go through the whole Germanic Iron Age up to the end of the Viking Age, in some sense. We always have birds in one shape or the other, and we have these 4-legged animals. Or, I mean, I should maybe mention sometimes they don't have legs, so we have more of a serpent animal, and that again goes from the early Germanic Iron Age up until the end of the Viking Age. So that's kind of the main animal groups. And then of course you have the gripping beast that we talked about before. That's this 4-legged bear-like creature, bear-cat-like creature. That's so hard to define. And like specifically that makes me think that like it gets back to my pet peeve of like, maybe it's not an actual animal. Maybe it's more a matter of presenting the shapeshiftiness and the jokeriness of it all, like the low-key aspects of the shapeshifty being. Because it is like, and sometimes, sometimes the gripping beasts have very man-like facial features with mustaches and beards, and like especially in the like Oseberg time, it's very hard to actually know when you're dealing with a human being, or like human-esque being, let's say, or a more animal-like being. And I think that's kind of the point, that you're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to make it out, like figure it out. That's exactly the point. But again, we have these very clear depictions of bears, or like bears, not so much. Maybe we have some, but it's very, very few. We have wolves, sort of. We have serpents. We have birds, like birds of prey, ravens, eagles, whatever you want to call it, right? So yeah, that's the main thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When you said about the birds, I think what the classification of birds are the most complicated because, example, the Vandal style. Sometimes people say that a eagle, that say a raven, and we think, oh my god, eagle, raven. I say only that's a bird. I'm not to like to classify and say, oh, this is an eagle, this is a it's specifically a raven, because we don't have somewhat this answer that you say, and that's I totally agree with you, because create a lot of problematics about when people say no, this is that, and we
Yeah,
don't have some answers for these
yeah,
animals or creatures in the art styles.
yeah. Because I think, like again, it's a very modern way of thinking about it. Like these have these species. I mean, of course, they knew the different types of animals, but the Darwin-esque understanding of like nature also has this separate thing of like these groups of species, and that they're not connected. Like with a Viking Age outlook on things, you would connect things like birds as a concept has a very spiritual meaning. It's they, as far as I know, was known to go to the other side. Like they could deliver messages. Like think about Game of Thrones, right? If you know that series, like they have this like the Raven that is this sometimes how do you say, like you can travel even in the shape of a raven into other spheres, realms. You could yeah. It's a symbol. It's but it's also more than a symbol. It's an actual being that can transgress boundaries, uh, geographical ones, but also like spiritual, like worldly boundaries. And it works as a totem like that. And it doesn't matter if it's a raven or a eagle or whatever it is. It's the birdness of it that's important, and maybe also specifically the bird of prey aspect of it, because I mean, ravens, eagles, you had them on the battlefield probably picking at the dead, and you have this image obviously of like the birds carrying the dead to the other side, right? Like these kind of ways of understanding their world and how it connects to the artwork, and how the artwork is kind of specifically what the artwork is representing, and that it's not important that it's a specific species, but it's other factors that are important to understanding, if you really want to understand what's behind it, right?
Yeah,
But it's so
that's
difficult, right?
yeah.
You
It's
know,
it's a subject that have many mysteries. I think Viking Age art have a lot of mysteries to we have to analyze and find how that complete their information that complete the other, and that's very very interesting about the study that. And we know how to say that have an answer. Well, why the styles of Viking Age start with biggest some structures like the eyes, in example in Wolfsburg, and some aspects of the body, and when we come to urns that make the fine lines, and they start to do more fine structures. Have an answer about that? Why we start with this type of design and come to the units?
like how we come from like a more complex, like more elaborate style or to a more streamlined? Is that
more streamlined and more with more lines and more how can I say, with the complexity of the some knots that form with the body, and how or why, because this starts having some answer about that, have an explanation. I was very curious about that, why they start with some structure and come to that structure.
yeah, like with these specific styles, not in general, or like
Yeah,
you're asking
from
about
the
like
beginning to the last style.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's and that's a general thing with the Viking Age and the Germanic Iron Age. What's very typical for the Nordic styles is that they kind of, or they are inspired by other European styles, and obviously the Christian culture down south from the north. Obvious visual influences from the early Germanic Iron Age there. But it's always, they take some visual aspects or a composition or something, and then they transform it or imbue it with a very Viking essence or aesthetic or meaning. Like it's never just a copy that's I mean, sometimes it is, but in that general sense, it's very much like taking a structure or some symbol of like a visual thing that has some impact or has some significance. I mean, for example, like visual elements can have power significance, like significance of some kind of power from like. Think about the Caesar's eagle, for example. Like obviously that had some meaning, and that played into the Nordic spirit and the culture too, and their way of seeing things. Obviously, in some ways, inspired by Roman from the get-go, but I mean, it's always some aspects are imported and then they're transformed, and I think we see that in later styles too. Because I mean, when the conversion of Denmark with Harald Bluetooth and all that, you definitely have a very clear inspiration in the Ringerige style of Christian aesthetics at the time, like the acanthus leaves and stuff like that is a very clear. Like you didn't have vegetal motifs like floral motifs before that really in the Nordic styles, and it all of a sudden it's all about the leaves, all about like you can't picture anything without it having some kind of acanthus leaf or a spiral vine, something somewhere. Like even the hips of the animals are inspired by vine scrolls, right? So, and that's I mean, I don't know that much about like the European styles, but as far as I know, it's like a very clear import from like the continental and insular European styles that are like, of course, Christian based. And of course, you see, like it's obvious that with the import and the conversion of Denmark into Christianity and the rest of the Scandinavia too, you get this cultural influence, and then it's transformed into, or it's obtained in the visual language of the culture, right? So you import some features, but you adapt it to fit your aesthetics, and that's what they did. Like it's because you have this in the Ringerige style around like just after the conversion, you have this very elaborate style with leaves all over it, like fans of leaves, and I mean it's palm trees all over. and then you, as you said, you come all of a sudden, it seems, into this very clean Una style, where you see some of the same characteristics, but in the way they are delivered are completely different. It's much more clean. It's much more streamlined. It's much more simple in some ways. You don't have this abundance of leaves all over, for example. And that's curious to see. Like for me, could it be a change in spirit? Like, is it a matter of Christianity influencing like your way of perceiving the world, from going into Christianity with this very Nordic mindset at the get-go around the conversion time, and maybe moving into a more I can't remember the word exactly, but like ascetic, like a more modest way of living, a more Christian modest way of looking at life, at that there's a modesty and simplicity. Maybe I have no clue. I would love to hear more about that or understand that better, but it could be a way of explaining it, maybe. And we definitely see that in one style, the Nordic styles take very much, I mean, it kind of moves into the general European style. So at the end of the Viking Age, we don't really have a Nordic style anymore per se. At least not in the same way as we had it previously. It's like it's culturally and visually much like completely integrated into a common European visual aesthetic, Christian aesthetic, right?
That's fantastic. Know how this start and end of all the Viking Age years, because we saw many structures that we start with big structures like big eyes, big shapes of body. Some not with so structures with fine lines that we find in ruins, but they start with knots that are with some lines that are more big and more, how can I say, there are complexity that we saw that the lines are defined with more market. They are more structured with the creatures, or the body of the creature are more, how can I say, a little bit fat compared to the lines of the uni styles. And this is a interesting thing, so that because they start with an art that the creatures are more visible, and in the end the creatures are, how can I say, are more serpents and dragons appear in the Unis period. And the
Yeah,
other styles give us more creatures that more possibilities of creatures,
I mean,
I
is
think.
that um yeah, I don't know if I completely understand your question, but what I'm getting and what it makes me think about is like the curious thing is actually that you have these parallel tracks from the early Germanic Iron Age into the
Yeah,
end of the age, that you have like more figurative motifs where you can see, oh, this is a horse, like this is a bird, obviously, and then you
yeah,
have the ribbon animals that are completely simplified uh, ribbon ornamentation, like knotwork things that, as I talked about before, like you're not necessarily supposed to understand what kind of animal it is. But that's like we see it from the absolute earliest age of the Germanic Iron Age, that we have these ribbon animals, and they carry through to the Urner style. And at the same time, you have, of course, more figurative motives all along the way, from the early beginning to the end of the Viking Age too, right? I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but I mean, in my eyes, it's parallel tracks, and you have something of a spectrum in between them. But that's kind of the thing, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. You defined very, very well that. And for your work, it's a very interesting thing that you work with the runestones. And the runestones, your work are, I think, is one of the most brilliant things in your work. Is one, how do you structure the runestones in some points, because many of that runes sometimes they not are completed, have a piece that is not in there, but you fix it and try to do how the rune stones you have, if they are completed. And how do you do that? How research do you do to complete the rune stone? It's fantastic, because
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't have the completed text, and some piece of the art not completed, but you try and do and fix it. This do very perfect.
Yeah.
This
I mean,
is
the
very, very
annoying
interesting.
the annoying answer is like you do it by doing it, right? Because I think there is something that like just like an academic analysis in itself can't really get to, and that's like if you on the other hand like create art in a specific style, in a specific material, you're kind of in another mindset of problem solving from the get-go, uh, and it poses different questions in a different way that actually answers some of the academic questions that is needed to solve like what's missing from this ornament that we don't know about, right? So that gets to a question like you you do it by doing it, like, but that's, I mean, because when you try to recreate like some detail, you have this, or I mean, I have this library of references in my mind, uh, where I'm constantly like trying to figure out how do I have some little puzzle piece that fits into this place. But the thing is, like, sometimes it's not just one puzzle piece, like sometimes it's 3, 2, 4, like 10 puzzle pieces you need to fit. So you have to have this very complex intuitive understanding of what is needed and how to connect things to solve for that. I mean, and of course you do that in academic thinking too. But I mean, it is like there's something about practicing art that is different because it makes you think in a different way. It's a completely different way of thinking of doing that activates something else, I would say. So it gets to, in the process, some kind of problem solving. And in this case, it's what is missing from this picture. And of course, it is very, I mean, it's not easy, but it's, in some ways, it is simple with the Viking Age art, just because you have this very, I mean, it's sort of like building with Legos, because if you know what pieces you have, you can sometimes, or Tetris or whatever, if you know which pieces exist, you know which piece you can fit in, that will fit, right? So it's not about inventing the wheel every time, because you have these very clear guidelines sometimes of what is actually possible. But the thing is, you need to know like what's the structure, right? What's the concept? What's the thinking behind this ornament? And that's difficult if you don't like have a very thorough practical knowledge about how to do it or how to analyze it, or even both of them at the same time, right?
Yeah, I saw that in some point of your work you use some definitions of the Anne-Sophie Garzon, that she used some specific topics for describe the styles of the rune stones, and they
Mm.
have many styles, and she used some points of that, and that's a very very interesting that you do, because you use some of this classification of that her doing in her job, and that's you turn this very very authentic and very very fantastic, because we can saw the rune stone like if she was completed,
Yeah.
and this is possibility many more analysis for doing these stones, because
Mm.
sometimes it's very difficult sometimes to read with the original image, or only saw the rune stones in front of us, but with your drawing we can solve all the stuff that was found in some parts of the rune stone. And what do you consider your most difficult rune stone to recreate? That you consider, oh, this is the most challenge rune stones for doing for.
I mean, it's been a while, so they're not like that present in my mind at the time. Um, oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, what comes to mind is, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, yeah, okay. The obvious answer is, what's the name of it? In Skåne, like the monument there. Do you remember the name of it? With they found like the DR 285 stone a few years ago, like with this wolf lion creature on it. But we know from like there's a few stones that exist still and that we have, but there's in particular one stone that we don't have, or we don't know where it is. It might exist, it might not, but we don't know where it is. So we don't know what it looks like, except for a very, very old drawing that's not very precise. So I mean that's definitely hardest because you have it's a very muddled drawing too of the stone, so you can't really make out. There's obviously some kind of lion wolf creature on it, and then you have like something that could look like a typical like face, like we see very typically in the art styles and on several rune stones too. And we even have like a face flanked by two wolf-like creatures commonly. So that, but it's not just not clear. So it's in some ways it's complete guesswork. But it's also like an informed guess. Like if we say that this is the motifs that would have been on the stone, we know them because we have so many examples of them. So we can, or I can make an informed guess of what that might have looked like. It might not have been exact, but it could have been. It's plausible. Like if you rolled the dice and was very lucky, you might have the same image more or less, right? What was I about to say? Like, no, I forgot now. Yeah, but that's because for me as a visual, like a creator and an analyzer, it was very interesting in that case because you had this drawing of a stone that doesn't exist anymore, maybe, and then you had the artist in his specific style drawings of the other stones that we knew how they look like now. So from that you can kind of because when oftentimes back in the day when artists or documentary when you wanted to document a rune stone, and you didn't quite understand the characteristics and the intricacy of the ornamentation, you would quite often like botch it, like completely make some doodles that kind of sort of resembled something of a knotwork, but not at all when you actually go in and analyze it and look at it. So when you have this kind of drawing of the other stones that we know, like the ones, one of the stones was just found, so you could kind of compare, okay, where is this artist's hand strong and where is it not? So that's a really important information to have, actually, because you can gain a lot from that knowledge alone to see, okay, where can I be certain about, like the composition, for example. All the other depictions of stones that he did was very accurate in their overall composition and the motive. Like it was one to one. Like, yes, this sort of a line figure. This is sort of a man with an axe or something, and you have sort of the overall composition. And when it's like obvious details, like a man in a cloak and something, it was pretty one to one. But when it comes into the ornamentation, the knotwork design of it all, it was more difficult for the artist to convey what was actually precisely on the stone. So that's an interesting place to work from, right? And a very important like information to have as an artist to reconstruct this. But it's very unusual from other works, right? Because usually you have the catalog in your head or from other references, but this is like a different workaround to getting to some kind of knowledge, right? About what to understand about this artwork, right?
Yeah, you are completely right. Some rune stones are very difficult to analyze because some parts are very challenging. We need to have the significance of the parts of some. Try to understand the history of that are in that, because we have some stones that are relationship with the memories of person that die in some place, memories of families, memories of many things out there. How can I say, some that reference of Norse mythology, and that's very very interesting to analyze.
I'm
And
sorry, can you give me a second? I just need to run quick. I'm gonna be back in.
no problem.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
No problem. Welcome back. For our finished interview, I would like you to explain about your books and the new books and your project, Gelmir, that very different project and a very, very, I think, one of the very most curious and fantastic projects that you try to do, because you are doing like a compendium of many pieces of the Viking Age, and this is fantastic. I was Very, very excited about that because you be serving for many works that for researchers, for enthusiasts of the Viking Age art. So you can explain about that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, from the get-go, it was, it kind of like the Gelmir project was sprung from the thing that, like, during my work, I've collected a lot of references, like visual references on my own little computer. And I got some questions about, like, I did the anatomy of Viking art, where I did my own designs, and like I got a few questions about, like, but what did it look like? Like, do you have examples of what it actually looked like? And I was like, yes, I do, but I can't share it because I don't know where I got the images from. I don't have the license for it. Like, of course, here and there I can share, but it just came from a place of like, oh, we need this kind of resource because it is so useful to have everything in one place, like visually and connected. Because another thing that also motivated the Gelmir project was when you go to a museum in Denmark, when you go to a museum in Sweden, you get the history about Sweden, you get the history about Norway or a specific geographical area, or Denmark, Copenhagen, like, and that makes sense because they have their collection and they wanna, like, tell you about that, and of course of the region, the countries, and so on, the history about that. But there's so much lost in, like, not connecting the pieces across all of Scandinavia, especially when you're studying the artwork, because so many things are connected. And you need to have these connections to understand the style. So that's why it's one of the main motivations behind the project of having this, of building this resource of course, visual examples of the artwork and artifacts from the Viking Age and beyond on gelmir.com, but also connecting it to the museums, to the online collections, where you can actually reach a lot of this stuff. But you need to know what to search for. And Gelmir, the goal with that is to get you to give you an entrance, an easy entrance to all the gold that you're looking for when you're looking for what are the best examples of style ever. you wanna go, and then you can go to Gelmir and look up style, and in the future you can go in and, like, go into specific rabbit holes from there, like style brooches. I mean, it's already categorized like that on the website, but the intention is to have, like, this entranceway, this very intuitive, easy entrance into all of Viking Age art and all of Viking Age culture ultimately, right? So yeah, so that's Gelmir. So check that out. And of course, I mean, my books is sort of in the same vein, because it all started with the anatomy of Viking art, right? And trying to, from an academic perspective, convey to the general public, like, again, somewhat intuitively what is, or to intuitively understand what the characteristics of Viking Age art are. That was the project, and from that, that spurred, like, building Gelmir. And when I was in the process of building Gelmir up and, like, uploading all these visual references, I was like, and at the same time also writing the book, the prequel to the anatomy of Viking Age art, which covers the Germanic Iron Age, which I mean, definitions again, but the Germanic Iron Age is, in my eyes, we might as well call it the Viking Age, all of it, because it is the same thing. There are differences, but mainly the story is the same. Like yeah. But I know it's different periods, but it's the same. It's the same story. And like while writing that book and putting the pieces together, studying the visual references and stuff, I was also building the Skelmir website and uploading the images. And then it suddenly hit me like, yeah, I've already collected all these things. Like all the examples listed in the books I put on Gelmir because I wanted it to be available when the book came out. And then I was like, oh, well, why not put Gelmir out as it is right now in book form, right? So that's the idea. So it's kind of intertwined, and it will be in the future because it is very much the same project in a way. The books convey what Viking Age art are and teaches you in a very, I hope, easy manner. It gets you introduced very quickly to the Viking Age art and Germanic Age art, Iron Age art. And Gelmir.com is the same thing, really. Just different mediums, really. And of course, there will be many more books in the future, but yeah. I mean, the general thing in all of what I do with the Viking Age is like presenting things in a very easy to obtain manner. And of course also connecting the info and putting it out there. So to get people better acquainted with it, because I know there's such a interest in it, and it can be so hard to obtain and find the info. So yeah, that's it. So check it out, Gelmir.com. GELMIR.com. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And you do any specific about Hendrik style? It's your favorite style because you do the book only this specific about Hendrik. You have a preference for this style, or you do not? I only do because this style is very interesting to analyze in only one book.
Oh, yeah, now I get it. Yeah, I was just, it was so. I mean, yeah, I did a book on the Ringrigen style, yes, and it was meant to be a series. I think it was too big of a mouthful to actually make it a series, and I don't necessarily think the interest was there on that level. I know there are people that are very interested in that. Like it was essentially a book on how to recreate the specific style, going through the specific characteristic, like all of it. So you had all the Lego blocks, all the building blocks to recreate the style, and knew how to compose the different compositions and animal types and stuff like that. But I think it got a bit complex. It got a bit too complex, maybe, at least for a book series. And it was a ton of work. So I think, yeah, I can't say a lot about it yet, but there's definitely a plan to sort of make a project that kind of mixes all of the three types of books, like the compendium of examples and the anatomy books, and also maybe go into more detail than the anatomy books does right now, but not quite as a specific course on or textbook on how to do the styles, but maybe do a bit more detailed specifics about each style. But more about that later. That's in the works. But but it probably won't be like a more course books. But you can definitely get the Ringrige Essentials, as it's called, right? It exists as a book, and it goes through like everything you need to know to recreate the Ringrige style specifically, right? And I mean, it would be awesome to have like all 7 styles in that format, and also have the Germanic Iron Age styles too. But maybe in the future sometime. But again, I think there's more to come.
I will be very excited to buy these books. I was in expectation with these new 2 books. I think if you want, they come to Amazon for me, it will be more easy to buy. And when they come, I will be the first to click and buy, because I really appreciate your books. I love your work. You have some colorful works that with you do with the foot hacks, and it was very, very beautiful, that use some colors and are very different from your some draws that use only the black and white, and you do with the colors, and that was a very amazing down that. And Mr. Markussen, thank you so much for doing this interview. I was very expectation with this interview, because you are very inspiration for me and for many artists here in Brazil that are tattoo artists that are my friend too, and with some researchers. And for me, it's a big honor receiving you here in the channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun, and I know there's a lot of interest in Brazil for this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's amazing to be able to connect to you, and hopefully a lot of your listeners too, because I know they're hungry for it to know more about this. Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I will just stop the recording. Thank you.